Hi everyone, I'm Callen. Most of you know me. If you don't, I'm on the IGDA board and I make indie games. Hopefully like a lot of you do also. I know a lot of you do. And yeah, so this talk, I called it, I'm making a game in quotes because this is a quote I hear a lot, but what I don't hear enough is I released a game. And that's what I really want to hear more of. Let me know if I'm blocking this too much. Thank you, Micah. And so I want to talk about how to go from you have an idea for a game and you start working on it, getting you all the way to actually selling it somewhere and calling it, a small side business or maybe even a full-time business someday. And yeah, discussion is highly encouraged as I go through these. So we're going to cover a lot of stuff, a little haphazard maybe, but I think it's all great info. So I had this idea for a game, is what I've said to myself probably 100 or more times. You probably said it to yourself. Now, why do you want to actually make this game? So the wrong answers are, I'm copying this other successful game, so I'm going to make a lot of money. Or, it's going to make my resume look great. Well, if you make any game and actually get it done, that's going to make your resume look great. So why this game? And it could be you love the genre, you have previous experience working in similar areas, it fits well with your skill sets, or you want to learn something new, and this game is a perfect venue to do that for. So, as you work through a game, and this is something I'm going to cover, that you really got to push yourself after that initial bit of energy where you're like, yeah, I'm so excited about this. You got to push yourself all the way to the finish line. And so you got to figure out which of these things are really going to give you the energy to keep working on it when you get through to the slog kind of area. And so, for me, I wanted to make VR Party Club because I love VR, and I love games like Mario Party. So if you haven't seen it at one of the indie game meetups, it's basically a Mario Party clone where people can share one VR headset and everyone can play. The problem is, you do some market research, and that's why I threw this in here. You got to set your expectations based on what you're actually building. So I'm making a 4-player local game, and I'm making a family-friendly game. It's very colorful, and these slides come from a nice GDC talk called Know Your Market. It's by Eric Johnson. It's a really good talk, and he sort of breaks down a lot of stuff to sort of tell you what you should expect when you're developing. And clearly, I didn't quite pick the right place to start, but you know what? I'm so excited about it, and I want to learn to do VR, and I want to learn to do these things, so back to the previous slide, it lines up so well with these things that I figured I would just go for it anyway. Try to make it a short project. We'll get into that. And, even if it doesn't do well, at least I'm going to learn some awesome things about VR. So, do you make a niche game or a mass market game? Clearly, my game is a niche game. You might try and shoot for a moddable crime game and just go for high multipliers. Maybe you're really into moddable crime games. I mean, guess what GTA sort of fit into that? But yeah, so it doesn't really matter what you pick, because if you're in the mass market, you have this huge player base and you might capture a tiny fraction of it, or you have a very small niche player base and you can capture a big chunk of it, and if you look, these two numbers work out to the same thing. And so then it becomes a question of what you're going to invest in yourself and in your project. And I like this bullet point of plan your full feature set, and then cut half of it out, and then double the time it expects you to take on it. And I heard them talking about a similar thing earlier just tonight. Keep up with my own notes. Okay, so you go through this process and you decide, okay, I feel confident that this game that I had an idea for will be a worthy investment of my time. So what do you do to get it from that idea or initial prototype all the way to a finished product? So the first thing I want to talk about is tools, because I think any good overview of indie dev should talk about tools. Engine. Use an engine. I use Unity. Use whatever engine you're comfortable with, and if you're not comfortable with one, Learn one, see how you like it, maybe try a few, but you definitely don't want to build your own game engine, unless you're a masochist or unless your number one goal is learning how to build a game engine. In which case, you will probably make great strides on that learning goal and probably have a very hard time with finishing the project. Get familiar with the features of your engine, clearly, and also look for assets and asset stores that are compatible with your engine. So if you use an engine that does 3D, get familiar with things like Turbo Squid. It's a great resource for 3D models. Unity's asset store is one of my favorite things to look at whenever I just know what I need and I don't want to try and model it because I'm not a great modeler, not really a great artist in any capacity, but I know how to look through the asset store. It's a great skill. Next thing you want is source control. A lot of people, people who know source control swear by it for a reason, because there's so many things that can go wrong in development, whether it's your hard drive failing, house burning down, whatever. But the other great thing is, just in the course of your work, you might start programming up some cool new feature that you think is going to be really great, and this is how it's going to work, and you code it up and you realize it doesn't work at all, and you had some huge oversight, and you just want to roll back to where it was before you started. Just throw it all out. In source control, that's, like one command, and boom, you're back to where you were. And I love how the commit messages create a really good diary of the work you're doing. So just so you can look back, 1 month, 3 months down the line, and see the progress of what you've done, and just be like, okay, I am actually making progress on this.
Callen, what tool do you use for source control? Oh, there they are. Aha.
So yeah, the tools I like for source control, there's a few different, what would you call Git versus SVN. I guess that's the core program, but unless you're a real good Linux nerd, you're probably not going to use the command line versions of those. So I use Git through a program called SourceTree, which is great. It's made by a company called Atlassian, and I found it because I use Bitbucket, which is Atlassian's Git and Mercurial hosting service. But I actually recently found about VSTS, which stands for Visual Studio Team Services. So it's a Microsoft thing. I've read that they just rebranded it as Azure DevOps. I don't know. If you type VSTS in Google, you'll find it. But the great thing about this is it's totally free for up to 5 users on a repo, which is the same as Bitbucket. But whereas Bitbucket has a 2 gig limit, Visual Studio Team Services has no limit. So we've thrown a 100 gig repo up there, and it's fine with it. So for art, there's plenty of art tools, and it sort of depends on your style. I'm just going to say I personally use Photoshop and Blender. And, with a lot of these tools, some of them get very expensive. You have to balance between the free option that's out there but maybe has a higher learning curve or misses some features, and do I want to really spend on it? So I like this blend because I can't really afford Max and Maya, and Photoshop used to be about the same price as them, but now they're on a subscription model, so you can actually get Photoshop relatively cheap. I think it's about 20 bucks a month now. And I learned Photoshop really young, and I've just loved it. And yeah, for anyone who's a student, you probably have student discounts through your school. Look into them, they're great. Audio, one answer, Audacity. Any audio editing, of a raw audio file you want to do, change pitch, change speed, change volume, normalizing volume of sound effects is a big thing you want to do. Audacity's great, and it's totally free. The only thing you have to do is find the lame encoder DLL for MP3s. As for music, I've tried composing music for my games in the past. And now I'm to the point where there's so much good free music, if you know how to find it, that I just skip it. I go to SoundCloud, I search for Creative Commons 0, which is basically attribution only. You can use it commercially and for anything. And they have a whole thing in SoundCloud where you can search for that. And then I just look for techno tracks or instrumental tracks or all sorts of things. Boom. Add one credit in your credits, one line in your credits, and you've got a free song. You can also get a lot of really good music packs from asset stores. So video, not necessarily part of your game dev workflow, but you've got to share your game as you're working on it, and when it's done, and when you put it on these stores, they're going to request a video. So the tools I like for video are Fraps, which is $37, one-time purchase, or you can use OBS to do basically the same thing. It's free. I think OBS has a little more heft to it, so it if you have a low-end computer, you might want to go for Fraps because it's not going to take as much background stuff while recording. Handbrake. Oh my gosh, I love Handbrake. If you haven't heard of it, it's just the best MP4 encoder because Fraps actually spits out like uncompressed AVI files that will basically be about 4 gigabytes for every minute and a half or so. And Handbrake is the best at taking that and just turning it into a really well compressed but good looking MP4. You can do a basic amount of trimming, but it's not good for some other things like concatenating. So for real editing, I use Lightworks, which I found when I was doing a deep dive on free video editors. It's free with registration and some restrictions. You can output 720p, which is good enough for YouTube, and if you're basically sharing on social media, you don't need to be sharing 4K files. No one wants to wait for that to load anyway. Also, I just recently found, if anyone remembers Windows Movie Maker, I've been so sad that it's gone, but apparently some of those features are now in the Windows Photo app. So if you don't want to learn a new tool and you know Windows Movie Maker, I encourage you to look into it because it's a very similar interface. It's just a little hard to find.
You can get both, actually. If you updated your Windows 10 and it's gone, you can reinstall it. Just go to the Windows Store.
They do not offer it for download anymore. It is like removed from the internet. Like you can go to some shady like 101downloads.com site and
I
get
went
it.
straight to the store before they took it down. But
Windows
okay,
Movie Maker on the
Yeah.
Windows Store?
Yes, but apparently they took it down. Okay, they
I'm
had paint
gonna
up,
look into
the
that.
original paint up there too. But okay, then it might be gone too.
You know, the one place I didn't search is the Windows Store because I never look at the Windows Store for apps. Because I've never found anything useful there. And I just found this bottom one because there's some times where you don't want to post a video, you just want a GIF of your video, and easygif.com/video to GIF. Upload your MP4, get a GIF back. You can control quality options and all these things to sort of tweak the file size and frame rate. It's awesome. I love it. Little free website service. Okay, so past tools. Now, how do I actually develop games and get them done? And workflow, this is like one slide, but I think this is the most important one. So for me, it's all about milestones. You want to just see not really where the final destination is with a full, you can't really know exactly how everything's going to turn out, but you have an idea. But what you want to do is get a very crystal clear, like you could draw it on a board and write down a plan for it of what the very next phase of your game is going to be. So prototype 1, you might be like, okay, well I want to get my character and I want to get him moving. And once you have that, it's like, okay, now I want to get my first level built. And you set up these little milestones, and as you reach each one, it lets you know, okay, I'm making some progress. Now let's set up the next one. So for VR Party Club, because it's very minigame based, it's really good for us to like, okay, we want to do this one new minigame, or there's this one feature on the boards that we want to implement. So just recently, we added a giant Price is Right, like their giant wheel that they spin at the end of the game. We wanted a wheel like that to give you a random effect. And so whenever I was kind of like not knowing where to go next, I was like, well, I know I want this wheel, so let me just model the wheel today. And then a week later, I'm like, okay, now I've modeled the wheel, let me try and get the physics working for it. And then the next milestone is like, okay, physics are working good, let's see if I can make it stop on specific spots. Okay, now let's make those specific spots do something in the game. And so in like a series of 4 sort of mini milestones, I got this feature done. And next thing is how you divide your labor. So again, with VR Party Club, minigame based games I like making because it's so easy to sort of just get into a rut on one thing and fully lift your mind out of it and move to, well, let me just work on this completely encapsulated little thing. And then you can sort of like forget about everything else in the game, and then once it's done, you pull it back into the game, and that sort of gets you excited about your core features again. With different kinds of game types, it might just be one level, it could be one power-up. And if you don't have a team where you can divide labor, so I didn't mention this yet, but me and Kevin over there work on VR Party Club. So it's good to like have him working on the minigame, me working on the minigame. We'll collaborate a little bit, but we'll mostly just like have our own little end goal, and then we sort of wrap back around. But if you don't have a team, you can still split your work up by things like programming and art and stuff. And then on certain days, you know, you might feel like sitting in front of the computer and typing a bunch of code. Other days, you might want to like lay on the couch with a tablet and sketch some character models. And if you split things up well, you always know what the next step to move forward is on a bunch of different tasks. So the next thing I want to talk about is how to sort of continue through that midsection. This is a very talked about thing in game dev. I Googled like motivation making an indie game, and I found like 100 articles and picked 2 with some nice titles. And because, you know, whenever you've been working on something 3 months, 6 months, and you're past that prototype phase, you know, you've gotten the initial spark done and you know that you like it, but the end of it is still so far away, you can't really see it. What you have to do is sort of figure out a way to structure yourself and just keep it moving forward. So for me, I have basically a 2-pronged approach where I have low-hanging fruit and then like big features. So sometimes I don't want to start a new big feature. I just want to kind of go through and be like, well, I've been meaning to move this like menu item down a little bit. I've been meaning to recolor this from blue to red. You just do these very little things, like add a particle effect on some interaction that gives the user a little bit more feedback. Find a sound effect for something that's been lacking one. And you can just work on these little things, and it's like you're still making progress, but you're also kind of taking a break from the hard stuff. And then once you sort of do a bunch of that, you start to feel more motivated to do the next big hard thing, because you're like, okay, I've done all these little things, I can't think of that many more little things to do. This big thing, I'm going to start designing it out, working on it. Sort of like I said with the wheel, you know, that was like a 4-step kind of process. And as long as you just put in a little bit, day after day or week after week, you're going to keep making progress, and eventually it'll be done. So you're working on it, you're getting through those hard days, you're really liking how it's coming together. So, quality assurance. It's something that in those words we don't talk about much. I personally don't even like to use that word. I like to say just demos. I like to demo my game. I like to show it to people, see if they're playing it the way I expect them to play it, and see if they are having any trouble spots that I didn't expect. And at the end of the day, though, that's really all quality assurance is making sure the software gives the user experience that they're expecting, that you're expecting them to have. So you're the first line of defense in testing your code. Don't show something to someone that you know is broken, especially if you know you can fix it relatively easily. But you should still show it off because you're not going to catch everything. You as the developer will have blind spots of the things that just come naturally to you, and you realize that for 90% of everyone else, they don't get it all. So there's a lot of great places to show your game off, like this group, IGDA DC. We have our indie game nights every month. I'm sure a lot of you have seen me showing off VR Party Club there. District Arcade, I know a few of you were there. MagFest, their indie department, if you can get in. Or honestly, at Mag Labs this year, they don't have an indie department, so I just sat in the hallway and tried to pull people out of the thing and get them to play.
They have their 2-hour tables as well. So
Yes, they also have the MIVS Quick Play, which if you get there right at opening and sign up, you might get a spot, but those things fill up quick. Like, I'm pretty sure 15 minutes into the day, it's all filled up.
The hallway kiosks look really nice.
Yeah. And that's the thing with MagFest, is they have those little spaces cordoned off just for whatever. Find one. Find a corner that people are passing by and no one's using for anything, and just show it off there. Or, you know, one year they had the Global Game Jam at MagFest, and we got our prototype done pretty early, and we just started walking through the show floor, like, showing it to people, like, hey, play this, play this. It was great fun. And my main rule for demos is this: if you have to explain something to someone, make it more self-explanatory in your next build. Like, they're not just gonna all of a sudden learn how to do it. Clearly, if you're explaining, well, you have to push this button to do this thing over and over and over again, then they're not getting it, something's broken, you've got to figure out what. So you do all these things, you know, everyone's understanding the game, people are loving it, they're playing it for longer than you'd expect, actually just had a great time at Thanksgiving. I showed off VR Party Club to, I was expecting there to be like 8 people at this Thanksgiving dinner, and there were like 25. But there were some kids in like the 13 to 18 range, so I set up VR Party Club and I had them play a bit, and then we went up and ate. And then a little later, I heard sounds from the game coming from the other room, and they had just set it back up and started playing without even asking me or anything, and I was like, yes. That's how you know you're onto something. Everything's working solid. So it's not done, but it's doing well. It's good enough to call done in some respect. So what do you do? Now, early access is something that some people feel strongly against. I am hugely in favor of it because as a small developer, you don't have a huge team. You're not going to get 1 million people into your private beta. So this is like the sort of transition from showing it off to people in your local vicinity and trying to get the broader world to start playing it. So you'll get feedback. People will give you reviews. Some of them will be harsh. Some of them will be great. Now, the thing about early access is you're promising that this isn't it yet. So you can't quit. It's actually a great way to make sure you get it fully done because you're now out there saying, hey, buy this game, I'm going to finish it. And then, if you don't feel a pressure to sort of release after that, then I don't know what to tell you. And the one downside of early access is people want to feel engaged during the process. If you throw it up on early access and say, we're going to get this done in the next year, but here's the early access version, and then they don't hear from you for a year, that's not going to look good for you. People forget all about it. You might get some negative reviews like this developer died 6 months in. So you got to keep updating them. But that's also a good way to have a check on yourself. You put yourself out there and say, okay, so I'm going to keep making progress on this. Please watch me as I do this and tell me how I'm doing. Alright, so how do you actually release the game? What you're going to need, at a minimum, no matter which storefront you're putting it on, or even on your own website that you want to host, I don't recommend doing that. Use a storefront. They take a lot of money, but they're great. You need a video. You don't need a video, but you need a video. You're going to need screenshots. You're going to need to write a lot of text, short descriptions, long descriptions, little tweet-length blurbs, all sorts of things that you can use to market yourself and that the platform could theoretically use to market you if they really like you. You'll need some icons, like mobile icons. Steam has icons. Every platform has its own icons, and they'll be in various resolutions, various formats. You'll need a website because they want to know you're like a real developer with some online presence. You'll need a contact email for basically the same reason. And you'll need a price, and that is a discussion for another longer talk someday, but basically research the titles that are similar to yours. See what they're selling for, and then don't do the thing where you're like, okay, well I'm sort of like this game, but I think I'm only like 1/10 as good, so I'm going to charge 1/10 of the price. Like, try and imagine a more objective view of yourself, and like, I don't know, it's hard to sort of say, yes, my game is worth $30, because I don't think most any game is really worth $30 in some sense. Like if you sell 1 billion copies at $10, like that. But pricing is hard, and you want to just pick what you think is a fair price and double it, is sort of what I say. And then things you don't need, but you may also want to do on your website. There's a tool called Press Kit, Do Press Kit, and it's by Rami Ismail, and it's a great way to just structure the process of putting all the information a journalist would need to write about your game into a single page that they can easily access. Going to websites that cover games that are similar to your game, and just not just finding the websites, but finding the individual people attached to each article and their contact info who write about these games. And hopefully you can send them cold emails, which is really hard to do, but don't worry, they will ignore most of them. I think one time I sent about 50 to 60 emails for one of my games. I think it was the Drink Hearts Beer Pong game, to sites that were really into drinking and gaming, and I think I got one response back, and they were like, no thank you, we're not interested. So yeah, cold emailing, it's hard, but you also kind of just got to do it just so you're at least trying. And you know what? The one time lightning strikes and someone writes about you, that could be 20,000 new eyeballs on your game. So you got to have a social media presence. I'm not going to talk about that. You all know that. And creating relationships with people who run the platforms you're targeting, who run the websites you want to publish stuff about you, people who just play the kind of games like Twitch streamers and people who do YouTube reviews, anyone that you can find, no matter how small, if they're into what you're doing, form a relationship with them, because even if they don't give you press, even if they never lead to a single sale, they're still going to be a good person to lean on in terms of feedback, letting you know what you're doing is right or wrong in their eyes. It's always good to have a community, like you need to build a community around your game if you want to sell more than a dozen copies. And that community starts with the most excited people, I think.
I have a question.
Yes.
If you get emails from Poland or Germany saying they have a site and they want a few copies of your game,
Right.
you have
It's
any?
funny. I was all prepared for this to happen with VR Party Club, and then it never did. The advice I've heard, since this hasn't personally happened to me, is basically just vet them. Like, they'll give you their name. They'll be like, oh, I have this YouTube channel. If you go to their YouTube channel and they have 100 subscribers and their videos all have 12 views, then they're probably just trying to get free copies of the game. If, you know, they have a couple hundred views per video, then I don't think that's them hitting refresh 100 times. They probably have some actual viewers, and if they're asking for 1 or 2 copies, sure. If they're asking for 100, well, what do you need 100 for? So you kind of got to vet them. Give them, I say be generous, but don't let yourself get taken advantage of. Sales. Hopefully you released your game and sold, like me and VR Party Club, 28 copies. It's an amazing feeling to have even one person buy your game and just be like, yes, somebody thought this was worth money. But just remember, the platform's going to take 30%. This applies to iOS, Android, Steam, and from what I've heard, all 3 consoles. There's probably other stores that take less, but those stores do that because they want developers, because they don't have customers. A platform with customers, they're generally going to charge you about 30%. And yeah, this just goes back to the press thing. I mean, you're not just going to put it out there. I had this dream with Xbox indie games. I just put games out there and they become the biggest thing in the world. But that doesn't happen. A million other people are releasing these games just like you every day. You just got to hope that some people start talking about it, and once a discussion forms and more people can be pulled in, maybe you'll, you know, get a few links out to your store that you didn't personally buy ads for or send on your Twitter feed. And that's when things can really start to snowball. And it's only when you get a lot of that snowballing that you actually get one of these big hits. But you know, even if you don't get a big hit, you still sell some copies. You're still getting paid something for your time, which for a lot of us, I think we would be making the games anyway, even if we knew we weren't going to get paid. So it feels really good to even pull in $100 from something that you would have been happy just making for free. And just always remember, a single sale makes you a professional indie developer. And that is my talk. Woo.
So I want to go back to kind of one of the beginning slides you had about where you did your market research. So first of all, I'm assuming you did this after you decided to start making the game.
Somewhere around the same time.
Somewhere around the same time.
So, I mean, it's a bit of cognitive bias, but I tend to come up with an idea and then try to find research to justify it.
Sure. So then what do you suggest are the best sources to tap for that kind of research?
So that's really dependent on what platform you're on, what kind of game you're making. There's this one website that, in terms of just general information that I think everyone should absorb before they start any other market research, it's, who is it? QuanticFoundry.com. They run like a paid service that good articles for free. That they've done this huge survey of like hundreds of thousands of gamers, and it sort of breaks down like their motivations and the genres they're playing and the goals they're trying to get out of it, and that's just a great place to start. So for me, I was really interested in just trying to find out what the size of the VR market was, and a lot of that I had to just sort of do it all myself. Like I'd find one number here and one number there and a couple numbers here, and I'd try to correlate them, and I'd realize they're all different from each other in certain ways, and I sort of just kind of just got it in your mind, plot it all out in a scatter plot, and then see if the trend line looks up or down, and be like, okay.
So you had a lot of slides about get it done. How do you know when you're done?
Well, it's like that one slide said, when everyone's liking it, and whenever your core features are good and your secondary features are pretty good, and no one's having any main issues, you're not... So a good game is never done. I mean, they're still working on Minecraft. But there's a point where you know you can release this and not be like seen as releasing a half-finished piece of garbage. But you just want to get to that point where you're like, okay, this is a game. People could get enjoyment out of this.
They're still working on WoW.
They are still working on WoW. They're even going back and redoing the original. Anyway.
You had a point about a niche market versus mass market. Do you prefer one or the other? Or is it just kind of whatever floats your boat?
Personally, I like to go for niche because there's a lot of different sub-genres of everything. Like in online, communities kind of form... Did I stop recording?
No, your battery's about to run out.
Oh, that's fine. So there's a lot of like niche markets that you can try to tap into, and you know, you might go onto a forum for people who are into this subgenre of games, and there's like 2,000 people on this forum, but they're so excited, and you post your game up there, and you get like a couple hundred downloads from that one tiny community. And I think that's just a more manageable model for like individuals and small teams than trying to touch every single person in the world and get them all interested in you. And even when you do that, you know, even the best games, they're probably only capturing like a couple percentage points of the market. James.
What are your favorite games from a technical perspective in terms of like well made from a physics perspective or artistic perspective versus, and irregardless of how much you enjoy the game. Like you might not like the game, but you respect how well it was made.
Gosh, I feel like I used to lean much more heavily towards that kind of game, and lately I just kind of move more towards like, I want to play it and have fun. Let me think for a second. I don't know, I think there's a lot of good games that I haven't played that I really want to play. Like, one that comes to mind is like Kerbal Space Program. That game, like, I don't know, an XKCD comic told me once I'd learn more about orbital mechanics in that game than working at NASA, and I was like, that sounds awesome. I mean, I think it was you were showing us Factorio, is that what it's called?
Factorio's
Oh no.
Like, I was looking at that and I was like, technically, to just have all these moving parts all on screen at the same time, that's kind of like impressive. But, you know, I personally now sort of tend more towards things like Beat Saber, where it's just like simple and fun and like good to waste time on, and yeah, not quite mindless, just it gets you into a zone where you don't have to think too hard.
Makes you a better musician too.
So you didn't bring up publishers at all. Do you have anything to say about publishers and like which ones partners with and just anything about that?
I've never worked with a publisher myself. I mean, unless you count platform holders as publishers, which is kind of a weird gray area, especially because sometimes if you do well on a platform, the platform holder will sort of enter a publishing role with you and offer you like promotion in exchange for a higher cut of the profit. But my boss worked in the games industry way back when, and he said to me once, if you get an offer from a publisher, you almost always want to take it. Because even if they say, we're going to take 90% of the profits, if they, you know, sell 15 times more copies than you were going to, you're making more money in the end.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, I think most of us you know, we want to be rich and famous and whatever, but we also want the most people playing and enjoying our games. And the publisher is really a way to make that happen. Now, like I said before, be generous, but don't get taken advantage of.
Do you have additional advice on that? Have you had a publisher before?
No. I was just I was in New York talking to some people about it, and they recently dealt with stuff, and they self-published, and I was just asking them to. I'm in the process of making my own game, so I'm kind of thinking about this stuff too.
Yeah, no, publishers are really cool. I mean, I've talked with some people who've been published by Adult Swim games, and they've spoken highly of it. I mean, in general, like, they're going to, if you care a lot about having, like, some sense of control about your product, a publisher model might not be right for you. But if you're proud of what you made and you want to get it to people, they're the ones who know how to do it better than you. I mean, you're a developer, not a publisher.
Yeah.
That's why, yeah.
So during the game dev process, inevitably you run into some like, snags or backtrack. Somehow end up coding a bug right into your how do you get out of that kind of bug?
Okay,
Why
wait.
do you do like say weeks of work to fix something that is like ingrained in your engine?
Oh. Well, did you write your own engine? Then you're a masochist.
Well, I'm just like,
You switched the .NET 4. .NET 2, and you're like, God, I can't undo it.
I mean, that's another great reason to use source control, because even if you don't want to throw out a whole week of work, you can at least start looking backwards through your code and see, what did I do that caused these cascading problems? And you might see, like, okay, this day that I changed this to work this way because I thought it'd be a little bit more efficient. It is, but it totally breaks this one use case. And then maybe in that one file you can go back and sort of correct for it.
so keep copies.
Well, if you do source control, it does that for you. Yeah.
So you've made a lot of games. If you could go back through time and talk to young Callen on his first game, what advice would you give young Callen?
See, I would give myself advice, but then I know I wouldn't take it. I'd be like, the only way to sell 1 million copies of your game is to do some crazy stunt on social media that makes you look like a fool. You know, I'd say it's doing better about finding potential players of your game. Like, I used to just throw them out there and hope people found them. I didn't know really where to go or who to tell, hey, I made this and I think you'd be interested. So I think definitely getting a better sense of where your sort of typical player would congregate and trying to be a part of that community, that goes a long way.
So, to answer your question, where do you go to get the word out? And I was curious to get your thoughts on if you think that going to, a lot of conferences, say GDC or PAX, does help with getting the word out about it.
So I don't know if anyone saw the article that, what's his name, just posted on IGDA DC about going to conferences.
Oh, Vlad.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Vlad just posted about going to conferences. And I sort of agreed. I think this was the sort of point he was getting to. If it's a local conference and it's cheap for you to attend, do it. If it's expensive, really start counting the number of sales you get afterwards and see if it's worth it in the future. Where I go, personally, I try and just start with, I try and form as big of an immediate network of friends as possible, and then put it on Facebook, put it on Twitter, just sort of try and in person be like, hey, I know you're like the one person I know with a VR headset. Have you got my game yet? But yeah, I mean, I'm not great at socializing online anyway, but Reddit's a good one. You can find subreddits for just about anything. Posted in Unity a couple times, but mostly with bugs. All right. Any other questions?
Hardest lesson learned.
You're not buying that island anytime soon, but your friend is.
Yeah.
So I just learned tonight, sell your company to Google. That's the best way to do it. All right. Well, thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.
All right.